Welcome to Paul or Nothing, the place to get all of your Paul all of the time. Join me, your host Sam Wiles, as we discover the history, the music, and the man behind it all, Paul McCartney. To get in contact with the show, email us at paulmccartneypod@gmail.com.
Hi, hello, and welcome to another bonus episode of Paul or Nothing. This is one that I've been to get around to for a while now. This is the first of our singles and cold cut episodes. Obviously, for those of you who've been following the show since the first episode, you'll know that I'll be covering all the songs from Paul McCartney's break up with the Beatles in '69 right up to the present day. But I think, I first announced this idea back on episode 2, which was coming up to a year ago now. For those of you who have been with us for that long, and I've mentioned it numerous times since, so yeah, I'm sorry about that. Obviously, contact us on the email at paulmccartneypod@gmail.com if you have any stories about Paul. Maybe there is something you agree or disagree with on an episode that has previously gone. Obviously, this is a community show. I'd love to read all of your correspondence out. Send it in to paulmccartneypod@gmail.com. The quickest way to make contact with me and the show is through our Twitter, which is @McCartneyPod. Join that right away, as it's the kind of central hub of the show. The blog is now up and running, people. The Paul McCartney blog, which, again, that was something I mentioned very, very early on, I never really got around to doing for a while, is now up and running. We have 4 articles up now, I believe. I'm just checking the WordPress now. Yes, we have 4 articles up now. It's pretty self-explanatory. As with all of these blog posts, people are more than happy enough to point out to me when I've actually missed things and missed songs here or there, so I may have to do an addendum for that one. That is www.paulmccartneypod.wordpress.com. That's www.paulmccartneypod.wordpress.com. Please check us out on our Patreon page as well. If you want to see the show grow, if you want to see it expand, get some better guests on, better mics, better equipment, then please try and support us in your own small way. Also, find us on YouTube and Facebook by typing in Paul McCartney Podcast or Paul or Nothing. And there we are. So why are we here today, folks? Well, ever since this show started, I began compiling the extensive list of songs I was going to have to cover. And like I say, I realised that I was never going to be able to talk about half the songs that I wanted to if I just stuck to the strict album-by-album format. So many of the songs that we'll be covering today, by way of future re-releases, are now tacked onto the ends of official albums as bonus or hidden tracks. But as you know already, these episodes are long enough already without me adding another half an hour's worth of insightful, erudite criticism. I mean, the Ram episode, for example, would already be twice as long. And hey, it gives me a great excuse to make some more content for you out there. So after collating all of these orphaned songs, all these songs that don't have a proper home, the response would... I decided to after taking all of these orphaned songs off the streets, I thought I'd collect them all together and we would create cold cuts. This will essentially be a regular parallel series alongside the main show, where we'll be able to fill in all the blanks of the Wings and Paul McCartney solo discography that we've not been able to do till now. The best part about a series like this is that we're not constrained in the same ways that you would be if we were focusing on a solo album. We're going to be covering the swan song of the Beatles right the way up through the release of Red Rose Speedway in 1973. And even in those 3 short years, you'll be surprised at just how many styles Paul will attempt in so little time. I mean, Wings is notorious, like we've said before, for not having a distinctively singular sound or consistent quality, and it's in these singles where we're really going to see that. Now, I'm more than well aware that over the course of this show's run, I've been spending longer and longer in the review segments of the show, but here I'll be attempting to be as breezy as possible. Let's keep it light, people. But before we start, what is cold cuts exactly? Well, the reason this segment is named as such is because Paul pretty much had the same idea for something like this well over 40 years ago. Cold Cuts was an abandoned compilation album that was devised by McCartney during Wings' Venus and Mars recording sessions in Nashville, Tennessee, 1974. And it was to be a collection of all of his lost and unreleased tracks from the end of the Beatles right the way through his career with Wings. This album, variously referred to as Cold Cuts or Hot Hits and Cold Cuts, which would always have a great little visual pun on the label saying no baloney, was revisited by McCartney right up until the early 80s, but Capitol Records had no interest in releasing such an album, so unfortunately it was shelved. And as with so many of these things, I have no idea why. Now, you could argue that this collection was either going to be a move by McCartney to appease completists within his fan base, or that it was just some misguided vanity project. But either way, these lost children of his, for better or worse, are always going to be a source of interest, as it inflames that sense of mystique and intrigue. Why was it left off the album? Who made the decision? How does this song fit into McCartney's ongoing songwriting narrative? Would it have improved the album? Would it have made the album worse? This endless list of questions, and we're never going to have enough McCartney content. We're always going to want to devour more and more. And I mean, these really are the mystery songs, folks. The what ifs, the why nots. Let us explore some of the rarer creatures in the McCartney bestiary with our first Cold Cuts episode. Suicide.
I bet he says nothing doing. I call it suicide. Da 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 da
So the fact that the first song on this episode is one that I've already technically covered is probably good, as it can set the tone, as I've probably mentioned quite a few tracks from this episode in one form or another. Obviously I spoke about Suicide all the way back on episode 1, and my opinion on it really hasn't changed much. There are so many brilliant McCartney demos of him bashing away at the keys at his home, and 9 out of 10 times they're brilliant. They sound amazingly complete and ready for purpose, and more often than not actually get spoiled by the studio process. But unfortunately for this song, it's literally just Paul messing around at the piano at its purest, and the fact that he dances around the issue of actually making it into a whole proper song is always going to be a constant source of annoyance, especially for me. Like, when I think of discovering a lost McCartney song called Suicide, written around the time of the Beatles' breakup of all times, all sorts of weird, dark and wonderful possibilities start to swirl around your head. Could this be the morose antithesis for Paul's granny music? A sombre musing over the possibility of truly ending it all? No. What we do get is unfortunately one of the biggest McCartney letdowns till Give My Regards to Broad Street. Back when album bonus tracks were a pipe dream, Suicide was for the longest time one of the holy grails of lost McCartney compositions, and rather like Percy Thrillington, it may have been in Macca's favour for the mystery to remain unsolved. Don't Cry Baby.
2, 3.
A true work in progress, Don't Cry Baby is a song that would appear, rather at home on something similar to the Beatles' anthology collection. It's an earlier take of a familiar song, a song that I'm actually quite fond of, the song Ooh You from McCartney 1. And the main riff, with minor variations here and there, is the exact same raucous rocking riff that we know and love from that song, which is great. But though the main difference is that there are no lyrics here attached to this song, which, had this not been changed, would have made this the 5th instrumental on that album. We actually mentioned, whilst we were talking about Ooh You on our first episode, that McCartney had originally had a working version of the song with no lyrics for the track, and this demo tape is just that. And seeing how so utterly note for note identical the melody is, means any real significance of the existence of this track is ultimately pretty insignificant in the long term. If anything, it's just a breadcrumb trail, really, seeing how Paul got from point A to point B. Not that I'm saying Don't Cry Baby was a bad riff, but I think it's safe to say that it does prove that Ooh You did need some lyrics to help give it a little bit of heft and elevate it somewhat over just another McCartney instrumental. And as we know, Macca's debut album did not need any more instrumentals at all. Though it is nice to hear this very familiar riff on a scratchier, more homemade recording. The only other notable difference between these two tracks is the titular declaration itself, or should I say, soothing whisper from Paul, whispering, "Don't cry, baby," at the start of the track. It's another attempt by Paul to include his family and family life in his work, and the baby he's trying to soothe on this track is the same baby that would appear inside his warm coat on the back cover of McCartney 1. Womankind.
Right, fellas? Right. Womankind. Oh, they have a terrible time. 'Cause from the age of 10, they're chased by men, committing a crime. Go on, girls, earn your bride.
This little ditty just shows us just how much fun Paul must have been having writing songs at home, with a looming sense of detachment and freedom from the band. As for better or worse, Womankind is an unabashed McCartney pastiche through and through. Now, since McCartney 1 was so ultimately bare bones and so folky, it's nice to see that there was no dropping off point of Paul writing these granny songs between the breakup and Red Rose Speedway. He's at home on the piano doing his thing. Though with its kind of jaunty rhythm and twee lyricism, it has foreboding shades of songs that would become, You Gave Me the Answer, for example. This song is simply another window into the Showtime world that Paul has so clearly longed to be a part of, and probably regrets that he wasn't born sooner. As always, it's not bad music, just not my sort of thing. Another Day.
Sometimes she feels so sad. Every day she takes a morning bath, she wets her head, wraps a towel around her as she's heading for the bedroom chair. It's just another day, slipping into stockings.
Okay, so here we are at the first big pick of the bunch. This is a song which I last saw being used at the start of a Simpsons episode, actually, where its poppy melancholia highlights the day-by-day monotony of the ageing teacher Edna Krabappel's life. It was a terribly obvious and on-the-nose song inclusion, but as with many uses of McCartney's songs in other media, it's just a joy to hear the music, and it truly lifts whatever other potential mediocrity is on screen. So right from the get-go, I will state my bias in that I'm very much enamored with this song, as it was one of the first full McCartney solo songs that I learnt to play on the guitar. Not play well, but please don't listen to any of my tips on guitars or music or anything like that. I have noticed that, with Yesterday Aside, most of Paul's best tracks are his simplest in their structure. Clearly with this song, Paul is working at his most effortlessly catchy and infectious. And that always happens when he isn't intentionally overcomplicating the track. And Another Day is just a perfect example of this. This was to be a very important song within the McCartney discography, as it was the first single since the monumental cock-up that was the breakup of the Beatles. So it was of great importance that he sells something reliable, simple and effective. Something that would put a bit of confidence, a bit of spring back into the McCartney brand. Now, for some ungodly reason, Maybe I'm Amazed was not chosen to be McCartney's debut single from the first album, and it wouldn't be on a 7-inch till 1977. So it's safe to say that Another Day was definitely the second best option he had during this period. It's a wonderful showcase of what Paul is doing in this period as well. There isn't a lot of overcomplications going, he's just come off Abbey Road, a very lush, very grand album, and now the Beatles are over, and already we're seeing that Paul is stripping back. He's going for a much more earnest and honest recording style. This is very without frills, and its charming simplicity is one of its greatest assets. Another signal that this is definitely the end of the Beatles is that we have Linda singing on this song as well. We have some of Linda's best harmonies here. It's great that on Linda's first track where we really get to hear her. I think she actually sang on the actual song Let It Be, but she's not very prominent. Here we get some true Linda backing vocals, and it starts to set the tone for what the rest of the McCartney sound is going to be for the next 10 years. This is one of the few songs that the original Ram session guitarist Dave Spinoza would actually play the electric guitar on. Again, he's very competent, he's just not Hugh McCracken for me. And if anything, he seems to evoke a bit of a George Harrison type sound with the slide guitar on this one. In keeping with the rest of Ram, Another Day was one of the many songs in the controversial post-Beatles days that was credited to both Paul and Linda McCartney. And while she does feature prominently on this track, it's still very doubtful that she contributed anything past what Paul instructed her to do. And the idea that Linda's name is on the vinyl purely for tax purposes, whilst technically debatable, still seems like a pretty sound fact to me. What's exciting about this song, though, is that it's one of Paul's most melancholy yet upbeat tracks. In terms of the songwriting, it's actually quite a rare moment in Paul's career, whereby he actually sing about someone's life who he's not involved in at all. He's not singing from the first person, he's singing from the shoes of another. And it's always just so interesting when you see Paul exploring the lives of other people, purely because he does it so damn rarely. And the way Paul manages to capture a crisp and clear snapshot of a life of someone who may exist, of this person who may not exist, is just so fresh. The very first verse is just so painfully classic in its very matter-of-fact description of the protagonist's very dull getting to work routine, and it makes the song so much more relatable for a wider audience. For me, this song does way more for the working classes than Working Class Hero by Lennon ever did. McCartney really seems to know the grind, the grimy feel of just going to work for the sake of it, and the idea of just carrying on the slog, the way something can slowly chip away at you. You know, he's not singing about anything particularly fantastic or beautiful. He's singing about pushing papers and offices and traffic jams, and it just seems so down to earth and normal that it's quite shocking to think that Paul McCartney wrote this. And, you know, yet despite the kind of vivid imagery and its wonderfully melancholic way it's delivered, I remember thinking early on that lyrically there was a definite McCartney 1 vibe in the sense that it kind of lacks a true narrative completion. Very much like the song Teddy Boy, Paul simply falls back on singing the same verse from before when he's quite clearly setting up what feels like a story with an arc, with a beginning, middle and end. However, that may very well be entirely intentional, as rather than rewarding the listener with the protagonist breaking free or being championed for her hard work, a la, you know, something like Dolly Parton's 9 to 5, Paul is highlighting the seemingly never-ending slog that is working a regular job. And in that sense, the song perfectly sets out to do what it meant to. Another Day is an anthem for people who just get by. It's an anthem for people who may have had dreams and lost them. It's an ode to lost potential and yearning to want more, which is just so astounding considering the man who wrote it was a multi-millionaire at the time of writing. Overall, the song just sounds fantastic. The production is, since it is technically a Ram song, it does have that pristine production. Paul is driving home his talents. He is selling us the new McCartney. And in terms of an induction into the world of post-Beatles Paul, it does wonders for dispelling the fear that the breakup was going to mean no more good music was going to be coming out. If anything, Another Day just proved that things were only going to get better. Woman Oh Why. For those of you who listened to our second ever episode, where we covered the indomitable, the unbeatable 1972 album Ram, it will be no surprise that I've been itching to get back to this particular recording period, because for me, and for many others, it's by far the most fruitful and long-lasting in Paul's entire post-Beatles career. Woman Oh Why is a confidently hard rock / dirty blues track, especially for a McCartney song. He's playing against type here with this, as it presents a delightfully gruff and rugged counterpoint to the peppy melancholy of Another Day, which allowed Macca to market both his rock and pop images simultaneously with the same single. It accompanied Another Day, being the B-side, and it was a confidently hard rock / dirty blues track, especially for a McCartney solo song. He's really playing against type with this, as it presents a delightfully gruff and rugged counterpoint to the peppy melancholy of Another Day, which allowed Macca to market both his rock and pop images simultaneously on the same single. Though we all know at the end of the day, it should have been a double A single, maybe I'm amazed, with Another Day. But alas. Despite being such a categorical and historical mistake in terms of its release, the song still has a lot going for it. It has a distinctive, dense and inventive production, again featured throughout the entirety of Ram, and the same raw, joyful experimentation and inventiveness shines through, only cementing the idea that Paul truly works best when he's upset about something. Oh Woman Oh Why is easily one of the best forgotten early McCartney era tracks, as it is just drenched in that post-Beatle frenetic energy and angst that Paul managed to channel into what would become his most successful period of songwriting. Unlike the rest of Ram, however, it has hints of future McCartney silliness and wackiness that really helps relax the song a little, especially in the middle. There are some very quirky gunshot sounds that are sprinkled into the mix as well, and that are nowhere near as cheesy or bad as they should be. There are some great photos of Paul doing this. And again, against type, the song proudly boasts one of the most unfettered and gravelly McCartney rock vocal performances to date, evoking Oh Darling more than Long Tall Sally. I just love, the song somehow managed to feel really laid back, yet just be so aggressive. The way it just comes in, woman, no, why? Paul's just going absolutely crazy in this one. In the end, though, it never made the cut for Ram, which was already chock-a-block with hard rock blues type classics, and Paul was in no mood to make a double album, not just yet. Maybe if it had worked its way onto Ram, it would have replaced something like Eat at Home. but it has that aura, that scent, that gives it the Ram stamp of approval, that, for me at least, that really upgrades it above a lot of the other cold cuts, where you can see why they may have been left by the wayside. It's a real gem. I love listening to this song. Woman Oh Why is just a real gem. I really recommend it. And it has a very welcome spot on the deluxe reissue edition of Ram. Please check it out. Little Woman Love.
I got a little woman I can really love. My woman fit me like a little glove. You know I'll always love my little woman love. I take her almost every night. My woman love to hold me.
This next song is actually not as obscure as one may initially assume, despite being the second song that I actually became aware of on this list thanks to the Ram Deluxe Edition album. The song was also an early Wings B-side, appearing alongside the confusingly bland Mary Had a Little Lamb. Don't worry, we'll be getting to that one later. The fact that Little Woman Love came out nearly 2 years after the recording sessions for Ram shows just how much Paul was itching to get this song out onto the airwaves, into the public conscious. Though equally this could have just been one of the songs that he felt was okay enough to fill a gap on a B-side of a single. But if so, he wouldn't have played it live so many times. I mean, this song would make its way all the way up to the first half of the Wings Over the World tour. I mean, originally this track was a part of the Wings University Tour set lists and was one of the very, very few songs by Linda and Paul, apart from Maybe I'm Amazed, that would regularly appear in any realm that was exclusively Wings's. No Uncle Albert, no Monkberry Moon Delight, but hey, we get Little Woman Love. Now, even though this was clearly a guilty pleasure favourite for Paul, eventually when Wings at the Speed of Sound came out, it was one of the songs that would eventually be replaced by songs like Beware My Love, Silly Love Songs, Let 'Em In, Time to Hide, etc. Is this song better than those? Well, I'm not going to say definitively yes, but I think a debate should definitely be had. I'm not sure if that's props for this song or if it's just me shitting on Wings at the Speed of Sound again. The whole track starts off with a bang really and just continues with this great sense of playfulness and spontaneity that really sells the element of fun. Wings were a fun band and this is a great example of that. It's safe to say that there are many McCartney piano songs that start off with an arrestingly catchy and funky little flourish, but this one has to be one of my all-time faves, just for the way it chucks you right in the deep end, echoing McCartney's own pub classics. It's just such an obvious Macca ragtime jingle jangle, you know, the way it just leaps out and you're off to the races. I can't think of many more McCartney piano licks that are just so instantly charming as this one. You know, it's maybe something like English Tea or 1985, but it's a great combination of Paul bringing in his vaudeville influences and mixing them with the same kind of Dr. Frankenstein experimentation he was working with across the entirety of Ram. This song also has some truly excellent harmonies from Linda, as you would expect for a Ram collaboration, and again it reminds you that you really do have to dig a little deeper to find Linda's best work. Once again, that lack of sheen or polish that she brings to the table gives the song more heart and more appeal and just makes it feel a little more relatable. There's a great acoustic performance in this song too, with a distinctively satisfying twang that fills you with that kind of patented Macca countryside feel. The solo work is equally and deliciously boingy in its own right also. It just fills me up with that Ram country spirit that I'm always just so eager to get back into. Now, being a Mark Commode, Tom Waits and Imelda May fan, I'm always in the mood for an occasional upright bass solo, and there's a cracking little one in this song too. I mean, for a lot of people there's nothing more discouraging than the phrase bass solo, but it is truly odd that Paul, the iconic bass player that he is, doesn't have many more of these really, and I'd really like to hear some. Little Woman Love was one of the first songs that really stood out to me when Spotify blessed me with the remastered re-release of Ram, and it really hits home to you just how good these sessions were. I mean, if this was the level of song that didn't make the grade, then what were the songs like that we didn't even hear before? Like these are the offcuts, and these songs are better than half of the album tracks on later Wings albums. It also makes sense why Paul hung on to this song as long as he did, and the way he gifted it to Wings, as Wings at that point were a band that needed to foster all the sense of fun it could. A Love for You. A Love For You continues this blistering series of flawless Ram tunes. Following in from the footsteps of songs like Eaton Home and Three Legs, this black sheep of a song further demonstrates McCartney's real flair for producing harsh and gritty rock songs in this period. Again, why he didn't carry on with the Ram sound, I'll never know, but hey, it's his choice. It's like he almost burned too brightly around this time, paving the way for twee tribe like Win the Night and One More Kiss for years to come. This is the type of song that you can forgive McCartney's derivative sentiments on display due to his wholly awesome racket of a guitar that's going on behind it. The energy here literally leaks off the vinyl and stains the carpet. It's clear that Paul, while sticking to what he knows conceptually, is having a blast musically and in the studio. The song boasts one of those infectious McCartney vocals that is clearly a hell of a lot more interesting than the lyrics presented, maybe even better than everything else on the track. It's just a great fusion of Ram's psycho silliness and Macca's signature 50s rock and roll howl, put together in a very playful manner. I love how over the course of the song, McCartney goes from a very gentle, dear friend-esque tone to this completely bonkers Monk Merry Moon Delight warble, and the descent into hell is just such a fun ride. It's one of those little touches that Paul can insert into his less inventive rockers and give them a much needed boost. The use of double track vocals and multiple harmonies, all sung by Paul, also kind of hint at the fact that he's probably looking for a band to help him do a lot of this as well. So like so many of these Ram cold cuts, it's a very energetic and rapid track, and I really don't know where I'd fit it onto the album without spoiling it. But again, this is the quality of stuff that got left off. I don't know what more you could ask of Ram. The only negative thing I'll say about A Love For You is that out of the Ram cold cuts, it does seem to be the least inventive. It just seems to be too centred in rock. Hey Diddle.
Diddle, I want you back. Diddle, I want you back. Hey, diddle, I want you back. Diddle, I want you back. She can be found, but love doesn't care. Doesn't care.
Fading in with that whimsical McCartney acoustic twinkle, Hey Diddle is a shamelessly unapologetic McCartney family campfire tune. It was the first true joy I can really remember experiencing from all the list of bonus tracks on that deluxe Ram album. Musically, I am known to be a sucker for all things lovey-dovey and charming, which is probably why I'm able to remain sane throughout this podcast series, and I have many a friend with a far stonier heart that would give up after Red Rose Speedway. Hey Diddle by virtue is one of the most sentimentally twee and cute tracks Macca has ever written. It's an utterly sing-alongable experience in every sense of the word. You will never catch me not singing along if this is playing. The harmonies are just so inviting and audibly pleasurable that it forces you to join its uplifting chorus. Whilst it could be passed off as simple, it's clear that McCartney is still deep in that lyrical experimentation that littered the Ram sessions. Lyrically, it displays some of his best minimalism and brevity on display. Paul manages to, once again, convey so much with so little. Whenever I hear those melodic notes kind of slowly coming over the crest into existence, I feel like I'm instantly swept away to that idyllic, sunny countryside setting that the album was all about. The song is simple and the concept is simple, and it isn't bogged down by the latter over-sentimentality and over-production that would only hamper Paul, especially in something like Silly Love Songs. All you need to know is, hey Diddle, I want you back. The rest is all superfluous, and in this simplicity, Paul manages to boil down what makes this song work. Yes, it is a love song. Yes, it is a song about a lover trying to get his baby back. So we all know that Paul is hardly breaking new ground. But the fact that it strips back all the extraneous rubbish and just gets to the heart of it means that the song's overall cuteness and rural charm is enough to distinguish it from the herd. One element of the song that I do find particularly charming is that it features one of my favourite McCartney-isms of the era, and that is Paul's voice vocally mimicking the instruments. In the song he goes ba-dum bum 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 bum, and maybe Hey Diddle was meant to just be a track with songs added later, but I would never change this. I love the way he does it. It gives it that home recording feel, that wonderful McCartney demo intimacy and closeness that I personally just can't get enough of. Vocally, it has Paul working at his best in that softer acoustic register. Like the rest of Ram, it also has another fantastic example of Linda showing off her chops vocally. McCartney, it has been said to have pushed her to her limits on this album, and it really pays off. Essentially, this song exists in the same kind of tranquil, if woefully underrated world as Wildlife's Bit Bop, which is an equally silly little McCartney ditty that serves more as a song to sing with the kids on the farm than to sell albums, but yet has this rather transcendent quality which bewitches me constantly. The song's spiritual relationship with Bebop was finally cemented for the ages in glorious fashion when an impromptu medley of the two together were performed by McCartney for a camera crew visiting their Scottish farmstead. The joyous track featured on the compilation album Wingspan sports Paul alone on guitar with Linda's adorable backing vocals, and they're both pitted against the actual real-life diegetic sounds of the farmyard, the wind, and most importantly the adorable little sounds of their kids playing and running around them. It sells me that gooey side of McCartney that never seems to run out of juice, and I will admit it, I do love to indulge myself in it from time to time, because we can all be that soppy bastard from time to time. So why fight it? Rode All Night.
Don't feel so bad anymore. I'm over it, too bad anymore.
I'm so glad that this episode has allowed me to get back into some good old-fashioned aggressive McCartney material. Rode All Night is the last of the run of songs from the Ram era which are all shockingly good. And for the most part it seems that the reason Rode All Night never made it onto Ram, like many of the tracks, is purely just because it's kind of too similar to other songs that were on the album. I remember first hearing this track and thinking that it was just going to be another lame duck instrumental. Then after this extensive build-up at the start, which goes on for about a minute and a half, Paul just jumps straight in, and it is genuinely quite shocking, and it gives you a little boost of energy. And Paul translates that angsty pool of frenetic energy that he's been using directly over to you. He delivers us one of his maddest and uninhibited vocal performances ever, again keeping it in line with a lot of these Ram cold cuts. It seems like with a lot of these songs, this is where Paul's been really pushing the boat out on what his future sound could really be. Sure, it's not a technically complex vocal by any means. I'm just saying it feels so fucking badass to get to hear him scream even beyond something like Oh Darling or Monkberry Moon Delight. It is such a thrill. It's a wonderfully unpolished and imperfect song, and it's just such a shame that Paul's sound would continue to become more polished and more perfected in the way that it did, because this raw tape is just on another level. The drumming on the track has always reminded me of the Runaway Stampede, and it really fills you with that fist-pumping momentum that you need. You do not feel like this song is going to slow down at any point. And the song just shows how much of a natural fit Denny Sywell is for Paul. You can really tell that he and Macca were really on the same level during these sessions, how they could interpret each other very quickly, very easily, and just churn out songs like this almost effortlessly. Lyrically, like so many of the discarded Ram tracks, this is just yet another example of Paul honing the craftsmanship of his songs with very few lyrics during the sessions. It's just Rode All Night, way up out of here. But it kind of keeps in that country feel, even though it's a little more cowboyish. When speaking about the song, Denny Sywell said, Paul had just come back from lunch that day, and he had this tune that he wanted to jam on. The engineers had just started tearing down the mics for another session or something, so we started jamming, and it was outrageous. I considered those lyrics, I rode all night till I finally hit the daybreak. For me, that represented that he'd found people that he really felt comfortable playing with other than the Beatles. And it was such a major breakthrough. We just about had tears in our eyes. We just had so much fun doing this thing. I really felt like something miraculous was going on. Anyway, we got done after like 7 or 8 minutes of this thing. Paul looks at the booth and goes, "You got that right?" And the engineer goes, "I'm ready now. You want to do that again?" We both looked at each other like, "What the?" So we did it again. The second take was good, but it didn't have the magical spark of the first one. The song was later rewritten as Giddy and donated to Roger Daltrey for his third solo album, 1977's One of the Boys. Unfortunately, the song is far too long for what it does. It's great that it can so easily keep up the energy that it does for that duration, but I feel like it's one of those songs that I really would have taken a pair of shears to and just clipped back somewhat. The repetitive lyrics really don't help with this at all either. Like, I know Paul is experimenting with minimal lyricism during the Ram sessions, but they just feel lyrics for the sake of lyrics rather than any real concept. And yes, I know it's a jam, but you either could have been a little riskier and thrown some improvisations in, or you could have taken the track back and reworked it later. And this song meanders far too much to ever come close to something that would actually appear on Ram. Actually, this is one of the cold cuts with the least amount of things going on within the song. And since Ram is so brilliantly lean and compact and perfect with no fat to speak of at all, I just don't know where Rode All Night would fit. I completely understand why McCartney didn't put it on the album. For me, Rode All Night is one of those McCartney songs that I'm glad I don't listen to all that often, and isn't that well known, as it allows me to forget it exists, and every now and again I get to experience that unique slow burner build up fresh all over again. Again and again and again. The Great Cock and Seagull Race. One of the things that made Ram so immediately and so outstandingly superior to McCartney 1 was its complete absence of irritatingly unsatisfying instrumental tracks bloating its runtime. However, the fact that McCartney actually did record this kind of instrumental, produced it to relative completion, and then chose not to put it on Ram is the greatest legacy that this song has to offer. Look, I'm not trying to slander this one too much. You know, I like a good old ragtime McCartney jam as much as the next guy. It's just that I'm so fucking glad that it isn't on Ram to sully it with silly preoccupations. The song shows that McCartney really was crafting something special with this album. He shows a rare restraint by being rather selective with the album's track list, and songs like The Great Cock and Seagull Race, for a brief moment in McCartney, technically Paul and Linda McCartney's history, were no longer needed. Honestly, the one main impetus behind this episode, and I think some of you may have already guessed this by now, but certainly it had something to do with the fact that it allowed me to just talk about Ram some more, and you would be right. Fuck, I love that album. What I will say is that I'm not totally convinced that the ever provocative Paul wasn't simply looking to this song to be a not so subtle way to get the word cock printed onto one of his albums. I mean, he already did have two Beatles shagging on the back of Ram. Oh yeah, so the song itself is another one of those kind of plodding, dodding McCartney jam instrumentals that, whilst never boring the listener, also fails to develop any real connection or progress within the track. We have the ever mighty Hugh McCracken doing this consistently awesome thing, and then outside of it we just have this pretty bog standard bluesy affair with Paul doing his best Jules Holland boogie woogie piano. I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying that if you do skip it, or if you couldn't discuss it on a podcast, I honestly wouldn't blame you. Sunshine Sometime. The last of the poor little lambs from the Ram sessions here, and another instrumental. To say that Sunshine Sometime, oh that's hard to say, Sunshine Sometime, is hardly a song that's on my radar or on the pulse of internet forums is a grand understatement. But it's a song that is not without its charms, which only goes to credit the maddeningly fruitful Ram. Now, when you compare it to anything that actually did make it onto Ram, you can see why it was left off. There is an unfinished quality to it, and it doesn't seem to go anywhere new after the first few beats, and unfortunately it stagnates. It feels more akin to something that would actually appear on Wildlife, for example, with its very laid-back, bucolic nature. It's some of the most overtly chill-out vibes that McCartney had ever done in this period, though I don't know who in his fan base this really would have been for, though. I will say that I've always been a fan of this song's delightful and unexpectedly serene percussion element. It's a very unique sound to the McCartney catalogue, and it's a shame we don't hear it more. Sunshine Sometime could almost be best described as McCartney's country prelude to his fascination with reggae music. In the grand scheme of things, though, the song just sounds like Paul warming up his creative juices in the studio, and doesn't have the same appeal or draw as something like one of his big, overblown jam sessions. Like, we all know Paulie is a fan of recording literally everything that happens whilst they're playing, but this just seems like he was going too far into the moment. But this just seems like he was far too into the moment to see this song for what it was. Same with The Great Cock and Seagull Race. I'm glad Paul demonstrated enough self-control to not include it on Ram. Though it does make you wonder whether all of these Ram cold cuts couldn't have just made their own self-made lucrative LP in their own right. Give Ireland back to the Irish.
Give Ireland back to the Irish. Make Ireland Irish.
studied a little bit of Irish history at secondary school. It was one of those topics where it was like, this might be on the exam, but probably not. So let's just give it a once-over kind of deal. So fortunately for both you and me, this means I'm not about to go into any depth about the troubles in Ireland and what the separation is all about. But what I will say is that it's been a part of the wider culture, especially in England, for centuries, with a strong identity of its own. Hell, this cause really does deserve a decent song or two, maybe even bring people together towards some sort of resolution. But it doesn't deserve a song written by the 1972 Wings lineup. Give Ireland Back to the Irish is a key example to highlight the hodgepodge, unorganised way the band was conducting themselves and their sound during this period. I just can't help but feel like this is just another prime example of Wings trying to do something completely off the wall and daring and ambitious without first having laid the groundwork that a regular band should. I mean, come on, this was the first single that Wings ever released. Yes, this was the very first one, and they're going head to head with all the best rock bands at the time, and you want a broad mass market song with critical acclaim and public acclaim, and the first thing you do is rush out the political equivalent of Mumbo. Like, it's just such a shame that this song caused as much fuss as it did, as it's just so underwhelming in every aspect. Now, to be clear, I know this song does have its fans, but let me just say, the chorus is way weaker and less fulfilling than it thinks it is. It's a chorus that feels so horribly unconstrained and held back by its clumsy wording, chosen to express which were chosen to express the ideals of the song rather than create a good song. Give Ireland Back to the Irish does not roll off the tongue at all. The fact that the songs Ban and Infamy are so prominent in the debate that it clouds and overshadows the fact that it is the bland Wings tune that it is. I have no reservations when I say that I find it shocking, truly shocking, that this was the first single. The rhyming as well is also a little wishy-washy, and the tame lyrics are an instant turn-off for me. But what's clear is that the time wasn't taken to make the song a little bit more interesting. Since it was recorded before Red Rose Speedway, it makes you think whether this wasn't still recorded in the same Wildlife mindset of doing something fast and with spontaneity. But we all know how Wildlife turned out now, don't we? There is no doubt, though, that Paul wouldn't have been influenced by Irish bandmate Henry McCulloch during the writing period for this song. But to say that Paul wouldn't have been aware of the whole issue would have also been a mistake. Like I said before, it was a massive political issue at the time. People lost lives. It was all over the news. And rather than say, hold a concert for Ireland type benefit gig, releasing a single would have been a great way to raise awareness and pontificate on the issue. The fact that Paul himself was making it would have had enough clout by itself to automatically make some cultural impact on the issue, as Paul explains here.
From our point of view, it was the first time people questioned about what we were doing in Ireland. It was so shocking. I wrote to Give Ireland Back to the Irish. We recorded it, and I was promptly phoned by the chairman of EMI, Sir Joseph Lockwood, explaining that they wouldn't release it. He thought it was too inflammatory. I told him that I felt strongly about it, and they had to release it. He said, well, it'll be banned. And of course it was. I knew Give Ireland Back to the Irish wasn't an easy route, but it just seemed to me to be the time. All of us in Wings felt the same about it.
Now, despite what McCartney says here, I would also have a sneaking suspicion that his knowledge about how to make a surefire hit in the British pop realm was also behind the song's inception, recording and release. Back in the 60s, right the way through to the 80s, if you wanted to ensure that every young person with a spare bob would buy your record, was to have it banned from the airwaves by the BBC, a la the Barbra Streisand effect. If you ban something, people want to find out what all the fuss is and buy it anyway. A song being banned by the BBC was an almost automatic certificate of being cool and being edgy, and this is exactly the kind of image boost that Wings was looking for in the first place. It would have shown Wings to be a group of progressive, youthful idealists, as well as giving the band a certain rebellious flair. Could you imagine if they'd carried on like this and we had a Wings whereby your parents would have been reluctant to let you listen to them? However, the combination of poor song quality and middling sales meant that it hardly shook the political zeitgeist, nor was the song the cool factor booster that it had intended to be. Apparently, when asked about the song by a friend several years later, Irish-born guitarist Henry McCulloch is said to have been embarrassed and underwhelmed by the song. But the song's impact isn't just about what it did and didn't achieve, but what it barred others from doing. The two Irish songs that John Lennon released the very same year, Sunday Bloody Sunday and Luck of the Irish, largely went unnoticed by the wider public and remain in relative obscurity to this day. By being the early bird and displaying his random yet effective ability to be one step ahead in pop culture, means Paul managed to sap any impact and originality from Lennon's work. And once more, I'm not propagating conspiracies, but to say that Paul wouldn't record a song of a similar topic just to get it out before someone else isn't an impossibility either. One last unfortunate side effect of the song was that Henry McCulloch's brother, who just so happened to live in Northern Ireland at the time, was beaten up by a bunch of thugs who were very unhappy with the track indeed. Whichever side they were on is a mystery, but it showed that at the very least, whilst this song may not have created a particularly good song, it sure did resonate on some level, even if the sentiment has worn away somewhat with the passage of time. But now from one controversial Wings track to another. Hi, Hi, Hi.
When I met you at the station, you were standing with a bootleg in your hand. You're back tonight in a place for a taste of a multicolored band. We're gonna get high, high, high. The night is young. Chewing my fucking little mama, gonna rock it every morning just because.
Now, when you think of Paul McCartney, it's relatively safe to say that the image in your mind is a pretty family-friendly one. Maybe PG cheek here and there, but nothing exclusively adult at all, really. As I mentioned just when discussing Give Ireland Back to the Irish, in the 60s, 70s, right way through to the 80s, if you wanted a song to get heard, you got it banned. Marijuana has now been a part of McCartney's life more than it hasn't, and its sweet, pungent, danky aroma can be felt right away across all of his work since 1965, whether that be the laid-back, harmonious, tranquil highs of Rubber Soul, the tripping balls psychodrama of Ram, to the hazy, stoner, rambling meanderings of Red Rose Speedway. But never, not even in the Rubber Soul sessions, has Paul been so overtly endorsing the consumption of cannabis, and probably ever. When speaking in The Beatles' The Dream Is Over by Kenneth Badman, Paul said,
It's a bit of a dirty song, if sex is dirty and naughty. I was in a sensuous mood in Spain when I wrote it. To me, it's just a song to close our act, and since it went down well when we toured it in the continent, I thought it'd be a good single. I think it's the best single we've done as Wings.
What's interesting about that quote is the idea that McCartney was very intentionally writing a show closer, as opposed to him writing Venus and Mars Rock Show as a show opener in a few years' time. It's clear that Paul, very early on, has his sights set on an idealised mega set list or track list that would steadily carry the band throughout the ages. Obviously, this is a set list that would finally come into fruition with Wings Over the World, and Hi 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 was included in every show as one of the two closing encore tracks. It's impressive that the song was written so early on in Wings' history because it was a mainstay from day one. Wings were so many things, but when they were live, they were a rock band, and Hi 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 is an out-and-out rock track, and it is a fucking killer one at that. At first, it was an essential track to fill out those early set lists with a genuine rock sound when they had a much smaller pool of songs to choose from. Then, in the later years, the song became a nodding of the cap to the earlier Wings era, where now they are these giant Titanic stadium fillers, and yet the song still pleases this much bigger crowd. Its effectiveness as a closer, at least in McCartney's eyes, was profound. One thing that I was quite shocked when I listened to this song a couple of weeks ago was just how quite risque the lyrics are. I'm gonna do you sweet banana like you've never been done. Like a rabbit, I'm gonna grab it, I'm gonna do you till the night is done. Like, I know that the real reason this song was banned was not due to the marijuana references, but due to Paul possibly talking about penises. Was actually because Paul was talking about his member in this song with the line, I'm going to do you with my body gun, which he claims was polygon. But yeah, this song is very overtly sexual. I'm like, oh my gosh, Paulie, how? I'm very, very shocked. My word, I'm absolutely speechless. I mean, Hi 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 may just be McCartney's obligatory stoner song, but what makes it stand out is how much of a stoner song it really isn't. It's kinetic, it's quick-paced, and it makes you want to jump around. This isn't the sit around in a cloud of smoke kind of stoner. This is Paul getting blitzed out of his mind and leaping around on stage like a madman. And for anyone who does smoke weed on the reg, they will know just how fun this song is and how perfectly it encapsulates the stoner ideology. Sea Moon.
How come no one older than me ever seems to understand the things I wanna do? It will be L7 and I'd never get to heaven if I fill my head with glue. What's it all to you?
I do these little random polls on the Twitter page. That's at McCartney Pod, for those of you out there not in the know. And I did a random little poll pitting a few songs on this offcuts list against each other. And I was moderately and reassuringly surprised that Sea Moon got the lion's share of the love from you fans out there. Sea Moon is the song you like. Wings as a band was one that played around with many genres, like I say, during their 10 years, and this was one of their greatest strengths, as it would allow them to draw upon a wider variety of tones and soundscapes. But this came at the cost of having a truly iconic sound. But what I will say is that whenever Wings did venture far off the beaten pop rock track, they would do something particularly special. This is one of Wings' rare few reggae tracks, and with the amounts of Caribbean holidays Paul and Linda took, it is no surprise that they became rather infatuated and became early proponents for Jamaican music. An early sign of their fandom was on their debut record Wildlife, where they covered the reggae song Love Is Strange. And whilst it's definitely pop reggae, the band seemed to slip into the personas perfectly. Not so much Denny Lane and Henry McCulloch, I imagine. They look bored as hell, or should I say stoned as hell, during the music video, and I know this kind of music was not what they signed on for. It's very sentimental, it's very idealistic. It definitely does sound like college kids or university students rambling about stoner ideals of a perfect world. I mean, just listening to the lyrics show you how much of a throwaway McCartney nonsense track this is. Apparently the belated singer, he alludes that Sea Moon is this kind of weird philosophical structure whereby you don't want to be an L and a 7 because an L and a 7 makes a square, and you don't want to be a square, and a capital C and a crescent moon, the Sea Moon, combined to make a circle, and a circle's not a square. So the song is basically about don't be a square. And I have no idea what any of that means, but I'm sure it means something to Paul when he had that joint in his hand. The song is more about youth than anything else. The song that really kind of sums this up is when Paul sings, "How come no one older than me ever seems to understand the things I want to do?" And in that kind of very self-reflective line, Paul is essentially, he's addressing the human condition really in a very silly reggae pop song, which oddly enough gives the song a lot more resonance to me personally. Whilst the song is full of pseudo-intellectualism and half-baked stoner comedy philosophy, it really is a wonderfully laid-back, chilled out, funny little Wings track. It's got a great amount of whimsy and charm that fully takes advantage of Paul's showmanship, and it has one of the oddest intros of any Wings track ever. Musically, it's a very odd track, and that was because everyone who was in the recording studio at the time, and that's because Wings at the time decided to actually jump one instrument over to the left, so everyone played an instrument that they weren't particularly used to. I'm not sure what the hell Linda was playing in the music video. She's shown to be playing the bass. I know for a fact she wasn't playing the bass on this. But musically, again, very stripped back, very relaxed. And yes, while it does skirt that kind of obladi oblada granny vibe, it has enough oddball charm to make it stand out from other songs, from other piano-based tracks in Paul's discography. And if this song shows anything, it shows that Wings really shouldn't have abandoned that reggae sound as early as they did, as they seem to succeed so well in it here. I mean, this song still comes up in Paul's setlist today, so I don't know why it was a sound that they ever abandoned. Overall, Sea Moon and all of its separate parts have all the makings of a guilty pleasure track, but something about them, when they're put together and shaken up by the band and delivered to you in this way, really creates something very immaturely transcendent. Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow. Everywhere that Mary went, that lamb was sure to go, and you could even sing it.
Okay, so for the end, folks, we're really going to be going off the deep end into some weird-ass territory here. This next song really put serious McCartney fans to the test and strained many a listener's tolerance of Wings' already shambolic first year. This song may very well have sunk a lesser band and very nearly derailed Wings forever. Now, Paul had clearly expressed an interest in creating music specifically for children, ranging from Throwaway's Bit Bop and Hey Diddle to the Rupert the Bear project that was nearly abandoned, things like We All Stand Together. It's a noble effort, children deserve good music, and Paul is good music, so who better to take the task? It also represents another interesting writing challenge for McCartney to write to. This is the man who managed to create the charming Picasso's last words after a dare from Dustin Hoffman, I think we can say that with some certainty that this guy can conceivably write anything for anyone. So how can a McCartney song for kids become one of the most reviled releases in Wings' entire run? Possibly the most reviled. Again, this is no hyperbole. This song is easily the most commonly trashed on forums, comment sections, and the entire span of literature surrounding the group. You know, if we asked 100 people to name the very worst Wings song, this would be number one, first prize, every time. And is it deserved? Yes. The short answer is yes, okay? This may be the easiest review I've ever had to write because everything that can ever be said has been said eloquently, and I'm not sure how I could trash it anymore. Doesn't mean I'm not going to try it though. Now, there are two main schools of thought on the origins of this track, the first of which is highly tied up in the impact of the last song we discussed. The fact that Hi 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 was in turn banned, according to most sources anyway, had incensed McCartney to no end. Unlike Give Ireland Back to the Irish, that song was not meant to be banned, and therefore had affected Macca's wider plan. No, it was knowingly cheeky, yes. It was an in-joke, it was provocative, yes, but not bannable, surely. Based on what I've read on McCartney, it seems his disgruntlement in this moment either comes from a genuine sense of unfairness for the song's censorship or, and this is what I'm kind of leaning towards, that Paul thought he'd won one over on the ratings board and the censors, and they proved that he hadn't. Wings had been put on the spot critically, where a fast, hard-rocking crowd pleaser had been taken off the airwaves. So in protest, it is said that McCartney wanted to create a sort of unbannable song. A song so ostensibly and stubbornly inoffensive that it would make the point of highlighting how ridiculous it was to ban Hi 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 in the first place. Now, maybe if he'd done this with either a good song or even a funny song, then maybe this would have worked. But the fact is, he chose to release one of the most dull, uninteresting, uninspired, and frankly, boring songs ever written. The other school of thinking is, and this is the one championed by Paul himself at the time, and by unimaginative people anywhere, that Paul was genuinely, in the kind of Froggy Rupert the Bear kind of way, trying to make a song specifically tailored for children. Now, this smells a lot like bullshit to me, as Paul was still within the realms of knowing what is and what isn't cool and trendy, you know, to some degree. And for him to risk the legitimacy and street cred of his new band, you know, this new band that hasn't settled down yet, and then use them to make a silly little children's song would have been incredibly stupid. But then again, never say never. And Paul always likes to hinder himself with odd challenges all the time. Now, many people seem to think that this is a bit of a misstep for Wings at this moment. Yes, McCartney was pretty much immune to career suicide by this point, but the band's image was not so immune. Whether Paul was just so impassioned by his defiance or apathetic about his consequences is anyone's guess. But he was certainly playing hard and fast with the image of the group at this point, both critically and commercially, very much in the way a solo artist might be. Clearly, this wasn't a band decision, and it just showed that Paul was already taking the reins and blindly leading the band artistically into disaster. The image crisis that this song played upon the already floundering band was not helped by the very twinkly storybook Beatrix Potter-esque music video that was featured for this song on the James Paul McCartney TV special. I'm already ashamed that this pitiful excuse for a song has probably taken up the lion's share on this episode. Like I say, this podcast is a shambles, isn't it? So yeah, folks, I'm going to draw it to a bit of a close here around this time, methinks. I think we've got a lot of ground covered for now. We've gotten up to well through 1973. It's post-Band on the Run stuff from here on out. And we have plenty of tracks for the next episode. This has been the first of our Cold Cut series here on the Paul or Nothing podcast. It's been a real treat being able to sink my teeth into some of the more acquired tastes of the McCartney and Wings discography. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I hope I didn't trash too many of the songs there. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at McCartneyPod. Drop us an email at paulmccartneypod@gmail.com. Check out the brand new spanking blog. We have 4 new articles up at paulmccartneypod at www.paulmccartneypod@wordpress.com. That's www.paulmccartneypod.wordpress.com. Leave us a 5-star review on iTunes if you can, please do. And once again, please check out our Patreon page as well as the Patreon episode of the podcast where I've laid down my case, my sales pitch. Folks, I'm not gonna keep it too long. The music of No Words is playing as I was speaking. I'm sure you've been listening to Paul or Nothing, the place to get all your Paul all the time. Peace and love, peace and love. Take care, guys and girls. I love you. See you soon for our next proper episode, which will be London Town with my friend Maurice. Take care. Bye.